webinar. Handing you over now to Michael Curry, the Director of Switchshop, to run through the agenda for us today. Thanks, Michael.
Cheers, Patricia. Good afternoon. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Hope everyone on the call is keeping safe and well in these uncertain times, and the miserable weather that I'm experiencing here isn't affecting everyone across the country. So, as Patricia said, my name is Mike Curry, and I'm the Sales Director here at Switchshop. Just want to give you a brief introduction to today's session. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd love to meet you all in person, but hopefully this will serve as a good grounding for the topic today. And if you'd like to discuss anything further on a one-to-one basis moving forward, then please don't hesitate to get in contact with any of us that you hear from this afternoon. Typically, of course, as well, we would like to put on some lunch for you if we were meeting you face to face, but in lieu of that, we'll be providing a free Just Eat voucher, which you'll receive via email, so you can enjoy a lunch or some takeaway on us. The webinar today is fundamentally to discuss the challenges we see in the market for onboarding users onto a network in a secure and user-friendly fashion, and indeed how we're trying to solve those challenges. So, furthermore, and importantly in today's world, how those solutions are providing additional support in delivering remote access capabilities. I'm joined today by a few colleagues from both Switchshop and Aruba, who will be guiding us through our time together. Those include Neil Wilkinson, who's Switchshop's Technical Services Delivery Manager, Richard Ledbetter, Aruba's Security Technical Sales Specialist, as well as Dave Crowder, who's one of our Switchshop's Senior Network Engineers and our Aruba Ambassador. Lastly, and probably most importantly, we'll be hearing from one of our key customers at Sedgemoor District Council. They're going to be sharing with you what impact Aruba ClearPass has had for them and how it's provided a real-world impact in delivering remote services, particularly during these current circumstances. For those of you who don't know Switchshop, just briefly, we're a leading value-added reseller in delivering network infrastructure solutions. We work heavily in the public sector across education, local government, and the NHS, as well as having a strong presence in the private commercial space. We are first and foremost, and this is key for us, we're a technically led company. Our focus is putting the right solutions to the right customers, while always, of course, factoring in budget restraints and practical things. That's why we invest heavily in our professional services team and ensure we are working with the best manufacturers in the industry. We're here today with one of those in Aruba, and we're just one of a handful of platinum partners in the UK with those guys. And that's testament not just to our sales position, but rather how technically capable we are and how we work collaboratively with our customers. That, of course, covers the whole portfolio, from switching and wireless to the security products that you'll hear about today. So moving on briefly to the agenda. I'll be kicking off with Neil Wilkinson, who's going to be discussing those challenges that we see facing our customers for getting people securely onto the network, and a little bit about our technical expertise there. Moving on to Richard from Aruba, who'll be talking about their ClearPass and remote access portfolio and how that can support business continuity. And as I say, lastly and importantly, we'll be hearing from Craig Wilkins, who's the Head of Information Systems at Sedgemoor District Council. There's a short video about some of the work we've done with them, but also be hearing from Craig directly about their experiences. And lastly, of course, there's a Q&A session at the end, an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions directly of us. Throughout the webinar, I'll be offering the chance to ask those questions in the question tab at the side, which I'm sure you guys can see. So please do make use of that, and we'll address those questions and queries at the end of the session in that Q&A time. If we do run out of time to answer them all, we'll take a note and we'll contact people individually. So please don't be put off from asking questions if you see it filling up. So that's it from me. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Neil. He's going to discuss the challenges we see for our customers in delivering secure connectivity.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, all. My name is Neil Wilkinson. I'm Switchshop's Technical Service Delivery Manager. I'm a network engineer for the last 8 or 9 years with Switchshop, and 8 or 9 years prior to that in the NHS. So I'm a little bit of an understanding myself in terms of our environment. My plan today is to summarise the challenges that we've found over time on onboarding the vast range of devices and users onto a secure network. I would like to indulge for a minute though and just talk about Switchshop and our engineering team for a second, simply to provide some reference to our experience of this type of deployment. We have a team of 14 multi-skilled engineers. We have a range of disciplines that we cover, both through LAN, wireless, firewalls. We're specialists across all that board, including servers and storage as well. As Mike mentioned, I think we're an Aruba Platinum partner. Our engineers hold many Aruba certs. We have ACDP, ACSP, ACMP, ACCP, so we're pretty qualified across the board to discuss Aruba portfolio. In fact, my colleague Dave Crowder, who's on the webinar today, he is a senior Aruba engineer and an Aruba ambassador, as Mike mentioned. So he's got key relationship with Aruba directly and their engineering team. Our principal LAN engineer, John Davies, is an ex-HP LAN architect himself with decades of experience. So we utilise his knowledge a lot in our designs. We have a firewall architect amongst our peers as well. He's globally acknowledged as being at the top of his game. We have systems engineers that provide integration with many systems and solutions. So we like to see we're well placed in terms of this market. We also hold a couple of principal project managers as well to deliver these sorts of things. So it's quite a widespread of experience. We have a service desk, themselves certified in Aruba technologies, offering first and second line support, and are growing into a managed service offering as well. So that's well placed in terms of this environment. We support people in different verticals. We proudly support the NHS during this difficult time with lots of NHS customers, many local government customers such as Sedgemoor, who we will hear more about later on. We also cover very heavily in education through primary, secondary schools, colleges, many colleges and high profile universities as well. Our primary objective from an engineering perspective is to verify that the LAN and wireless design that we implement is best practice for the configuration that we're hoping to achieve. We are firmly of the opinion that wireless is simply a shortcut to getting your users onto the wired LAN. So the LAN needs to be completely fit for purpose underneath. The LAN design is fundamental to all the benefits that can be gained from your NAC solution, like Aruba ClearPass. So our engineers are experts in providing both performance-based and security-based topology designs. This segmentation of trusted and untrusted is a key objective as part of that, and the onboarding of those users into the right places is pretty much fundamental to this whole subject. So I'd like to have a little look now at some of the network access control challenges that we are faced with today, and I can set the scene a little bit for Richard from Aruba later on. So the primary goal of network access control really is secure access for guests, bring your own device environments and corporate devices alike. And this is a discussion as much about wired port NAC as much as it is about wireless. There's no point securing your wireless environment with enterprise-grade network access protection only to leave an open data point in an empty meeting room. We see NAC as an essential network-wide service, and our design is generally to accommodate the whole piece. So the question is, what do we need to achieve from this NAC, and what control do we need? Primarily, we need an effective AAA authentication service. We need the good corporate access should be of the highest standard encryption, and probably using certificates for authentication using EAP-TLS or something to that nature. Utilising your Active Directory for both users and machines gives you all those tools. But what about BYOD onboarding and those devices that you don't have control over? .1x, 802.1x for users, is that what you would need to want to achieve? Ideally, I guess you would. How would you offer that content to the user seamlessly though? These are the questions that we're regularly asked. The users don't want to be queuing outside the IT department for hours on end trying to get the IT manager to onboard them. It needs to be a seamless service. And you'll likely need to deploy more than just the SSID to that user. You possibly might want to deploy other things as well, such as SSL certificates for decryption, which I'll mention later on. Guest self-service registration is something else that's regularly asked for. Ideally, a non-technical receptionist or such like might be able to generate access control tokens securely, or even using the user's own Facebook or Instagram to onboard that to their device. Bandwidth control should be able to be monitored, restrictions should be capped. That kind of service is very common these days. And of course, more than ever, the IoT device control, Internet of Things, is more and more cropping up. We're seeing regularly lots of devices with less network intelligence. What do we do with them and how are they secured? These the numbers of these are expanding rapidly. So the goal really from a NAC perspective is have a very simple non-user involved process. A single SSID in the wireless environment, or a single data point in terms of the wired network, with classic identity-based service segmentation, with dynamic VLAN assignment, and that is completely dependent on the underlying LAN topology, as I mentioned earlier on, and that's where Switchshop very much look at the whole piece from end to end. Post-authentication, once the user is on the network, what do we do about informing other devices that authentication has happened? We can do integration with perimeter firewalls and policies, and single sign-on for consistent non-disruptive user experience. That's exactly the kind of integration that we do on a regular basis. Also, you may have a secure user today, a trusted user today, but what is the state of the device that they are actually using? Is that device today completely fit for purpose? So posture check-in is definitely a nice to have. We would really be keen to know if that device has been compromised or had inappropriate apps installed without their notice. So posture check-in and endpoint control becomes the next step in that NAC journey. And then once they are all actively on your network, what users are connected? What did they access? Where did they roam to? So that analysis and robust reporting must be really good. Possible integration with location services, maybe even to give you things like wayfinding and that content-based solution. I thought I would finish my little summary with a classic example of a pain point that we have found in BYOD. I mean, it's true for all environments, but especially in education settings. If you have a BYOD user that has successfully joined the LAN and they are behind a next generation firewall, which is ready to scan their traffic and look for look at their behavior, the IT department behind there are likely to want to scan for viruses on every type of traffic, including SSL traffic. They're likely to want to look and report on the user's web usage, Google searches, for example, to prevent compliance in terms of education. So that SSL decryption is a big ask, especially in BYOD. So it's likely that somehow you're going to need to automate the delivery of an SSL certificate to that user. And in BYOD, that is particularly difficult to do. The likelihood is you'll need a product like ClearPass. ClearPass is a solution that lets you achieve that kind of onboarding and separation and segregation and the seamless contactless approach that the users are looking for. So on a final note, as I said, hopefully I've set the scene for Richard to discuss Aruba ClearPass and device insight, which I think he's going to do now. If anyone has any questions from a Switchshop perspective or Aruba perspective, just drop us a line, we can chat at the end. Many thanks all.
Okay, hi everybody. Oh, there we go. There's my magic title slide. Thank you for that, Neil. That's a great introduction into some of the challenges we're going to face. Now, against all sort of text regarding what this presentation is going to be about, just to reassure you, I'm not going to make this too technical. There's a reason I'm a technical sales specialist, and that's because I'm a failed engineer ultimately. So I shall try and keep it light and airy, and I'm not really going to dwell that much necessarily on remote working, because the way this solution works, it shouldn't really matter where I am, whether I'm in the office, whether I'm at home, whether I'm on the road. The whole idea is we're a mobility company and we should be able to adapt, which is kind of something we have done. From the very time I started working at Aruba approximately 8 years ago, in fact, I had no induction whatsoever. I was just shipped a remote access point and a laptop and left to get on with it. And I've been pretty much the same way since. So this whole lockdown period has been great for me because I've been less isolated than usual. So anyway, before any further ado, let's talk about security in Aruba, because who would have thought that Aruba could really be described as a security company? Because obviously we're primarily famous for our wireless solutions. But you'll understand the importance of security to Aruba once you kind of understand the direction we're looking to head in over the next few years. And this can kind of be illustrated by all of our relationships with things such as IoT. So when Aruba first came about around 2002, 2003, our aim was to get everybody on wireless. Okay, we wanted wireless to be the first mode of access for pretty much everyone out there. And I think to a degree that has been achieved. Right? Most of us are now wireless first. And our big struggle around that period was making sure we had wireless that was obviously stable and could scale to the amount of devices we could see coming down the line. And obviously that's only got worse with whether it's IoT, BYOD, the very fact that we like to change our devices on an almost 6 monthly basis in some people's cases. That was the problem we had to address around that time. Now, around 10 years ago, actually, maybe about 7, we kind of shifted gears slightly and kind of tried to focus more on individual experiences. So if we've got these devices connected, okay, great, we've got an IP address. Are they working to that particular user or that particular owner of that device's satisfaction? And that's something I said we've been doing for quite some time. We would make sure we understood the device or the user behind that device, and then ensure we provided suitable quality of service for that experience to happen. And that's what I call the, oh, that's cool period. We would all have it. We would connect our Amazon Alexas or Sonos speakers or whatever else. We were so pleased with ourselves. We got them connected. We got them working. We said, oh, cool. And the business said, so what? And rightly so. Everybody out there is looking to get some kind of meaningful outcome from this. It's all very well that our users are happy and can work in the way they want, but it should also have a measurable outcome or measurable benefit to the business. So that's where we're heading to. So it's our plan in the next 5 years that we are simply going to focus on providing the data to transform business. So it's no longer good enough simply to have your Sonos speakers connected, your Philips Hue light bulbs connected, and your Bosch heating system operational. We want to make sure that the music's at the right volume, the lighting's right, it's not too warm, and we can all get on with dancing. Now, how we actually get there is where we see the importance of security. So essentially, we think, or we like to think, that the connection problem and the protection problem is solved. We've provided the means to get these devices online. The importance is, though, we need to be able to segment all these devices accordingly, get them in the correct order, because then these data streams can be fed up into a data lake, or more importantly, or more pertinently rather, a metadata lake. We can then analyze these various streams, derive some kind of sort of business intelligence, so that we can then later act, whether that's in an automated way or otherwise. We can then act upon that information, and we can act upon that information potentially for the benefit of IT in terms of continually enhancing policy and continually making more automation possible. But it could also be other better business analytics. So this is in terms of identifying what is different about the way one particular team works versus another. What impact can that actually have? Now, the important thing to address, though, is even though in our minds we're all nicely safely protected, we're not really there yet. And so the focus of today really is just highlight some of these gaps that we need to address. So the first gaps we need to address, they're kind of fairly obvious really. It's all about being able to address things that are already on the inside of your network properly. So rather than just securing the perimeter of your building, whether that's firewall or physical security, we need to start looking at security within the network, both on wired and on wireless. We need to make sure we've got the facilities to enable visitors to actually come in. And we need to make sure that they can get access to, whether it's just internet or whether it's internal access, it's entirely up to you, but we need to provide that facility. We need to make sure we can identify everything on the network. I want to make sure that I've both profiled devices and gone to the level of ascertaining that they're mine. It's not good enough just to understand the device. What's it there for? Who's it belong to? We also need to continue to look at BYOD, whether that's BYOD for people to actually work or whether that's just BYOD to provide internet access is a moot point, but they still need that onboarding facility. And that onboarding equally probably and more likely is there to stretch to contractors. We've got examples of large enterprise customers that, believe it or not, take up to 2 weeks just to onboard a contractor with their own laptop. Just that's how long it's taking these guys to do those checks. And then the other, probably a hell of a lot bigger problem than we initially think, is that of shadow IT. We all know the situation where we get that call from Vodafone or O2 offering us a brand new device to get us to lengthen our contract. And quite often what we do is take them into work and like to try and get them connected. So again, this is a problem we have to make sure we've got a good answer for. Now, our answer pretty much since 2003 has been what we're now calling dynamic segmentation. So this is taking advantage of having a stateful firewall in our mobility controller, and we're taking advantage of that to be able to inspect and police traffic as we want to, based upon device and user type. The idea being, if I can identify the user, identify the type of device, I can ensure they are only getting access to the things we want them to get access to in the name of doing their job. Now, how this works in brief is essentially we are using ClearPass at the center of our network, that's ClearPass Policy Manager, to gather up context about the connection. So we are going to try and understand where they are connecting from. So whether that's on the wireless, whether it's on via a wired port. We also want to understand who the user is, or if it's a headless device, what that device actually is. We can then combine it with other attributes. This could be from posture checking, for example. It could simply be on location or time. Based upon the evidence that we receive about that device connecting, we will then push policy down to that edge port, or down to that switch, or down to that access point as required. And that policy is a combination of things. So it's a combination potentially of firewall rules. It's a combination of quality of service settings. It could even be rate limits, or the amount you are allowed to download overall. So I say this really is mobility. This is me getting my stuff. We've identified who I am. We've identified how that I intend to try and get that stuff. And then over here, obviously, is the stuff that I'm entitled to get to. As I say, now this has been our answer for many years. The only recent change, certainly in the last 5 years, has been the addition of the wired solution, which has obviously come from HP networking. But we're essentially saying no matter how you connect, you should have a unified experience. Now, the problem has historically been, and this is probably the biggest gap we see right now, and that is the wired network. So when it comes to the wired network, we know it's always worked. We're all very much used to just being able to plug a device in, it gets an IP address, boom, we're online. Now, we know, however, that we do need to start securing this, but I think we continually put this off, and we put it off because we fear blocking anybody important from accessing the network. We also fear accidentally and inadvertently blocking a particular service, and suddenly no printers work, for example. But the main problem that's holding us back, I think, from securing the wired network is actually information on how to go about creating this policy. How do we make sure we've got a policy that's actually relevant and pertinent to the types of user and device that's connecting? Now, for that reason, we've recently unveiled in the last 6 months a new product called ClearPass Device Insight. Now, this product can act completely standalone. The idea is it's very quick to deploy. It's simply a piece of hardware, what we call a collector, that's going to be present on premise, and that will view traffic So it's going to be all spanned traffic will go into this collector. It will do some analysis, and it then feeds metadata up to a cloud platform, which is based upon the Aruba Central platform. The aim of this is to classify devices that are on the network, so give you a very quick view of what exactly is connecting to the network for, compliance purposes, but it will allow us to dig a little bit deeper. So in terms of, we can go out and look for vulnerable devices, whether that's looking for devices that have certain ports open that they shouldn't. Maybe they're running something like a web server and we don't want them to, or DHCP. We can quickly get our hands on that information and run a report on it. On top of that, it can also link in with vulnerability assessments. So for example, just with this platform, it can log into your Windows user base and try and ascertain which people haven't bothered patching, for example. So again, we can have a report on that. So first step, visibility, reporting and compliance. But it's also worth knowing that this can then also integrate straight in with ClearPass Policy Manager to actually enhance the policy. So anything we find within Device Insight, any extra information, so this could be I have a certain set of devices that have vulnerabilities. I can apply a tag to that device. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop it working, but again, it's another thing that ClearPass Policy Manager can use when it comes to making its decision process. And the whole aim of this, gather as much context as possible, whether that's from ClearPass Device Insight or whether it's from over 140 partners we work with. Whole idea, more context, better decisions. It's simple as that. Now, with that in mind, it's probably best to actually show you just some of the interface and some of the details of ClearPass Device Insight. And I will hand over to a colleague of mine, Darren, who's helpfully recorded a video for me.
Hello, this is Darren Mellor, the ClearPass Specialist for Europe, Middle East and Africa. When developing a security policy for a network, the best place to start is to identify what devices are on the network. To this end, Aruba has developed the CPDI, ClearPass Device Insight product. This is located on the network where it can see the devices and also the associated traffic. It then uses that information and passes it through an artificial intelligence system which will categorize the devices. This is the view of the graphical user interface showing you the devices and their classifications. Of the network, we're seeing 374 devices, of which 329 have been classified. And these are shown here. We can drill into a particular classified devices and pull out more information about the device, specific details on the general overview, when the device was last seen, and location information and more information as required. This can be generated or exported as an individual device. We can export it as a group of devices, or as a full audit, we can generate a report and generate and export this as a PDF or a CSV. Now, often the artificial intelligence doesn't have sufficient information to actually categorize the devices. For instance, these devices here. If I look at, say, this group of 4 devices, it can see they're using these business applications, but it can't actually categorize them because it hasn't got sufficient information. What you can do, if required, is help with classification and give it some sort of information about the device. And this will then move that grouping into the overall summary view. So now those 4 business application devices have appeared here. This information will also be fed back into the artificial intelligence. Likewise, if you're dealing with PCI compliance, you might want to see the vulnerable devices. By clicking here, we can see that in the last month, I've seen 53 vulnerable devices. Clicking on here, I can go and drill into what specifically is failing on a particular device. So let's drill into this device, and I clearly see it's got HTTP and Telnet, which are part of the vulnerable services. Again, this information can be exported to the appropriate authorities. Hopefully that gives you a good idea as to the purpose of the CPDI. Thank you for listening.
And I'm back. Right. Thanks for that, Darren, or virtual Darren. So what are we actually going to do with this information? So we've gathered, as I say, we've gathered up information to device insight. We've also got the ability to receive data from some third parties. But the actual process of getting these devices on board or connected to the network can be broken down into 4 major steps. So the first one, obviously, and this is the thing everybody does. So we're going to authenticate these devices. The big thing here, though, is making sure we have means of authenticating any type of given device. So it's going to be varied. So for example, it's very typically your domain devices going to be secured using ETLS. We're going to validate the certificate, whether that's user, machine, or user and machine, before we let the device connect. Then when it comes to BYOD, we have options here. It could be as simple as a PSK if we're only giving them internet. Up to you. Equally, we can actually onboard these devices, so we could create and issue those devices with a machine certificate, so we know that they are kind of corporate owned BYO devices or belong to employees. Then we get to the other end of the spectrum, where we're dealing with things such as IoT that really inherently struggle with security. So for these types of devices, it may be something as simple as just checking the MAC address of that device. Now, we know that can be spoofed. However, because we've got some enhanced fingerprint detailing from ClearPass Device Insight, we should be able to see if that device has changed, if that is in fact something spoofing an IoT camera. The point is we have multi-levels of checks going on here. Now, one that's completely off the screen on top of that would also be web authentication, where you would actually have a splash page maybe to authenticate a guest onto your network. And those guests, the process for those guests can be as simple as, visiting what the Americans like to call a lobby administrator or a receptionist who could actually create a username and password for them. Equally, we have umpteen different self-registration workflows. So the guests themselves will put in some information about themselves. We will create an account dynamically. Now, authentication, that's just the first step. Now, this is, another big gap we find. There's lots of people that think they've secured their wireless estate, but actually all they've done is insist on having authentication. And what's that meant rather, is they've simply checked who the user is or checked what the device is, and thereafter they allow them to do anything, which kind of half defeats the point, because I certainly don't trust every user, that's for sure. So really we need to start making some further checks. And this is the kind of the often overlooked stage, in my opinion, which is authorization. We want to check, is this device up to date? The first place to check arguably is going to be AD. We're going to check the group membership of a particular user, because that could impact on what I then later want to allow them to do. But on top of that, it could be checking posture. So that could be either by running the ClearPass On Guard agent on a particular device, whether that's a permanent agent or dissolvable agent. It could equally be, and this is really where I think ClearPass comes into its own, we can actually check against many different third parties. So it could be, for example, if we're looking at smartphones, for example, it might actually be easier to issue certificates to those devices via your existing MDM platform. And we can then actually make a call to that MDM platform. So we've authenticated the device, but I will then check against third-party platforms such as Mobileeye or AirWatch, for example, and go and see if that device is still under the management of that platform. Has that device been jailbroken? When was the last time that device checked in? Regardless of how we check, I say we've got the facilities to check different things. So we're going to say in this example, if it's a corporate laptop, I want to make sure, yes, they've got a valid certificate and they're in a particular AD group. I also want to check they have got antivirus and a firewall in operation. And as I say, that could either be by running an on-guard agent. It may also be just making a query against McAfee EPO, for example. With our BYO devices, I want to ensure that they are under the management of MDM. And that's certainly what happens at Aruba. So if I go into the office with my Android phone, I'm allowed to connect to the Wi-Fi in terms of authentication, but it won't actually allow me onto the Wi-Fi until it's validated that I have AirWatch running on my phone and making it run hot and slow. So that's what's going on there. Now, when it comes to the IoT camera, we're going to check that the MAC address is as it was when it first joined, but I'm also going to validate that the device not only comes from a device OS family called Acti, who's the manufacturer of this particular camera, but I also want to insist that the device is being listed as known. Now, this is a manual kind of check stop, if you like, where someone in the IT team, or we can do this in an automated fashion, we've insisted that this device is now checked. We have now made sure that someone has kind of physically looked at the device and said, yes, that's it. That's definitely one of ours, rather than someone else just sneaking a camera into an inappropriate location. So that's what we're going to check on the authorization side. And then obviously it's up to us to determine what access we want to give these devices. Now, as I say, some of this information can come from ClearPass Device Insight. Probably more so for the IoT devices than the enterprise, because the enterprise devices typically need to get everywhere on the network. Otherwise, why are they actually working for you? Whereas when it comes to IoT devices or printers, for example, CPDI or Device Insight will have shown us the destinations that this device is regularly communicating with. We can then make sure our access control rules are applying that kind of restricted access. Now, when it comes to enforcement, we have two choices. Typically, we would recommend what we call dynamic segmentation, but a lot of people out there, and understandably so, do not like the word dynamic. It fills them with dread because it's, what is actually happening without my say-so, I've not been involved, and so on. So what we can do is, once we've made these checks, we can just send a message to that particular switch port or that particular access point just to open the port. Then the underlying policy will be that of whatever is pre-configured on that switch port. So if that switch port was there configured for an IP camera, great. We've opened the port up and the switch does the rest of the work. However, what we can do is leave the switch with a completely vanilla config, have as little config on there as possible, and let ClearPass actually handle that configuration being pushed to the device. So ClearPass can then be the centralized place where you can create policy and all policy is pushed. So therefore, all of your complex configuration statements regarding ACLs, QoS, etc., can all be hosted on ClearPass. So if you need to change policy, you've got one place to update it in, but also, as I say, you don't need to continually go around configuring your switches. And the switches, by the way, every time a client comes in, it will say to ClearPass, I have the following config, do you have anything different? If so, then an update will be sent, but otherwise there is no need, to send every time this piece of config. And the whole idea of this, of course, as I say, is to save on user time. There should be no need to go around configuring static ports via CLI anymore. And more importantly, of course, we're saving on ports. I know so many customers that used to, every switch was exactly the same. 2 ports for uplinks, 4 ports in case of, cameras, another 8 ports for phones and so on. It shouldn't necessarily need that. It should be the case that the network can easily identify what these devices are, who the users are behind them, and then actually apply the necessary configuration. Now, just because we've now allowed that device on in a suitable way doesn't mean we're finished here. At the same time as applying the config, we can be informing other third-party platforms about that connection. Now, there should be animation here, but anyway, so the whole point is we've connected this device. I may want to inform the firewall to also invoke a similar policy in readiness for this device. But that can also act in a sort of converse fashion. So if my firewall, my SIEM, AV platform, if they can spot any particular problems with a client, there is nothing to stop them making an API call or sending a syslog message into ClearPass. ClearPass can then react to that information and actually apply a change, where that change could either be placing this device into quarantine, or it could be raising an alert to the security team. The whole point is your network should be helping you do this. Now, with that said, let me hand over to a second demo where we can actually just show how easy that onboarding process can be.
Hello again, it's Darren here to discuss more on ClearPass. Today I'm going to be looking at Access Tracker and how we can make it more effective for operators. Traditionally, we'd use Access Tracker to see what's going on the network, but as things get busier on networks, you're getting too many authentications coming in and you don't see the details. Demo is going to try and show is how we can use things like ticketing systems to help track when devices connect, or unknown and known devices connect on. So what you used to do was, if an unknown device connected on, you would block it. But by blocking unknown devices, it has got two consequences. Firstly, the device will just continually re-authenticate, and you get reject, reject, reject continually every few seconds. This Apple TV does it like every 3 seconds. But also, if you're just rejecting devices, you've got no idea what those devices might be, and they might be legitimate devices. So what I've done here is I've used some emails on the system to create a conceptual mechanism to actually understand how you could improve the workflow for operators. So at the moment, this Apple TV is disconnected, as shown on here. I'll connect it in, and this will force a MAC authentication. The device should be unknown, so it should be put into the profiling role. There it goes. The request has just come in. It's put into profiling role. Let me look at this in more detail. I like to use roles, so I'm telling it it's unknown. It's not profiled and it's unknown, so I do a full scan on this system. So I sign it into this profile role. It's very isolating. All it can do is profile. And if I can get the IP address of it in a timely manner, I'll also do a full scan. But in this scenario, what happens is when it connects in, the profiling, the Apple TV will do a DHCP request, and it will be profiled in DHCP request. The consequence of that is the ClearPass will initiate a COA to that device. The device will be disconnected for 12 seconds, which allows me to move VLANs if I wanted to. And when it connects again, which is just connected here, it's coming into it comes in a different state. We now know that it's been profiled. So it says it's an Apple TV. That's more interesting. It's profiled, great, but it's still unknown. So because of that, I'm going to email the operator, but I know something of this device. So the operator is aware of it's connecting. Maybe it's malicious, or it could be legitimate. I'll initiate a full scan against it, and I'll also set a report. So rather than just, if this device was disconnected, reconnected, rather than getting another notification email to the operator, I'm minimizing it so you only get one per day. And I'll put it into an unknown role. So this unknown role, it's very isolated. All it can do is talk to the ClearPass who's going to try and do profiling, and not a lot else. So it's very isolated. Emails just come in. Right. So this is email. So that's a device there. So it's coming in from that particular MAC address, this particular location, which is identified port 3 on my switch, the time, and the profile information. Now at this point, it's the operator's choice as to, do I register it and allow it on the network, or do I block it? And so the choice is down to the operator how to control this device with further communications. So by clicking the link, we can jump into the operator. So just log in as, quickly log in. And I've got a very, very simplistic view where basically all this operator can do is just enroll this device. I could make this a lot more flexible. I could allow him to dictate what roles, what VLANs is going to be assigned to it. But in this case, I'm just going to say, fine, I'm going to create. Once I create, that will force the device to disconnect. So it will do another COA to it. The device will be taken down for 12 seconds. And when it comes up, if I get back to the right screen, So that was the operator logging in, and this was the actual registration, the device registration, which did a wild bounce. So the interface will have gone down for 12 seconds, it'll come up, and we should see a Mac authentication come in. Now it's a registered device, and here's the Mac authentication come in, and we're putting it straight into the Apple TV role. So the question is, do we actually get anything when we connect? So we only just connected it, so it's we'll need to give it a few seconds. And it's up. So I can then go on to see one of those particular films. And it's just down to the speed of my internet. Okay. The point being is we actually know it's an Apple TV. It's a known device. So I then go and put it into the Apple TV role, which I'll show you, and initiate an Nmap scan. A lot of IoT devices don't have many ports open. So if someone was going to spoof an IoT device, chances are they're going to be putting something like a Raspberry Pi in its place. So using an Nmap scan is quite effective because normally our Raspberry Pis might have more open ports than an Apple TV. Meanwhile, the output from my Apple TV is a sophisticated ACL. So I'm restricting what this Apple TV can communicate because I know the Apple TV can only do a certain thing. It talks to the internet on certain ports and everything. So if someone was to replace this Apple TV with, say, a Raspberry Pi and start communicating with other services, or if this Apple TV was to be hacked, the ACL will restrict what they can actually access, so that the things like the Mirror attack would basically be restricted to what it could do. So it could only talk to the services it's allowed to talk to. So it really mitigates the Mirror attack. Anyway, hopefully that was interest. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to email me on darren.meller@arubanetworks.com.
Hello, right, back again. So, firstly, if you do need to contact Darren for any particular questions, please note it's darren.meller@hpe.com. He's not used the arubanetworks.com address for at least 5 years, but he was having one of his little moments. So, just to actually wrap up, in terms of what we're attempting to deliver, both with ClearPass and the security features of our infrastructure as a whole, the whole aim is to, ease compliance worries, make sure we're providing visibility, even if we're using IoT. We're making sure we provide a flexible workflows for any type of device that's connecting, whether it's corporate, BYO, guests, IoT, and so on, to ensure we have no unknown devices resident on our network. We're trying to save time by centralizing and easing policy deployment, and that's whether it's across wired, wireless, or even third-party networks. And finally, we're trying to maintain and take advantage of data from any existing investments you've made on the network. So whether that's AV, whether that's endpoint protection, whether it's IVR systems, we want to be involved in that and automate those actions where possible. Now, with that, my time is over, and I'd like to hand over to essentially the man that counts.
Hello, I'm Craig Wilkins, and I'm the Head of Information Systems at Sedgemoor District Council. We're going to show you a short video that we've done with Switchshop. So we'll play that first, and then we'll get on to some factors and observations from our implementation.
Sedgemoor District Council wanted to increase the capability of Wi-Fi services across its entire organisation. Predominantly, Sedgemoor are trying to maximise the use of our infrastructure. We want to build once and use many times for our partners. But one of the biggest challenges we have is serving all our customers, whether that's internal as employees or external as general public, and our partners. And obviously within a district council function, we have lots of partners, and trying to deliver services to them over the internet can be quite challenging.
The benefit of using the Aruba solution for remote sites is this seamless access for our users. They do not even see a change in their service between being at the main offices and the remote sites. From the point of view of Sedgemoor District Council, ClearPass gives us one tool to manage our services that we wish to provide to our users.
The impact to Sedgemoor District Council employees is the ability to move around the building freely with constant Wi-Fi connectivity, but also be able to return to their desks and dock their equipment.
With Aruba ClearPass, we can define roles for our users and customers. So we would have we have a corporate role. So your corporate laptop will join the Wi-Fi and it'll be seamless. The user does not need to do anything.
Switchshop has a huge amount of experience in deploying wireless networks across a range of complex environments. When we're doing that, we work very closely with customers to understand the challenges that they face and then design a solution that addresses those challenges. What we are ultimately looking to do is provide a seamless and stable end user experience. At Switchshop, we really pride ourselves on having a very experienced and knowledgeable technical professional services team. We have some of the most qualified and experienced engineers in the country and actually across the world in a wide range of networking disciplines, and they understand the challenges that customers have and have experience in deploying networks to meet those challenges.
Sedgemoor have worked with Switchshop, who are Aruba Platinum partners, for a number of years. They've been really good, they're dynamic, they're knowledgeable, and they're effective, always on call when we need them, and they've delivered the results.
Switchshop are a very good company. They've been very supportive. They help design the solution and the services we can provide. The engineers are very good, very knowledgeable.
In terms of HP/Aruba, they met Sedgemoor needs in terms of accessibility, quality of service, total cost of ownership, and availability to our customer base. I believe the Aruba HP infrastructure in terms of security is one of the best on the market, and it's definitely delivered everything that we needed.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that short video, and I've got another slide that I'll just go through some aspects. So if we start with collaboration, the team are already using Aruba and HP products, so that's just to highlight that initially. And it was actually a swift transition for my technical team to switch to ClearPass, so that's always a good factor. The way we implemented in terms of working together, we were supported by Build As We Go. We're not a huge team, so it's one-to-one training with my lead communications officer, looks after my infrastructure, Brian Durham. We've used this approach before and has worked well with Switchshop, so had no concerns there personally. And obviously the way we operate, let's say we're not a large team, so Brian's now cascaded his learning to other members of the team, such as our deployment officers and other infrastructure officers, to minimize support time with Switchshop and Aruba moving forward. Obviously, the approach we use at Sedgemoor is like many other councils, I believe, and even the private sector. It's all around agile, quick, and dynamic. Iterate through changes and get things done, and that worked really well with Switchshop and our operating framework. To the extent that we've implemented ClearPass, the Wi-Fi 6 APs and wraps really quickly. I would say it's probably in total less than 2 weeks fully implemented. In terms of ClearPass itself, in terms of ensuring our services are available, it's definitely increased the level of secure segmented access for our corporate devices and guest access that we need to provide to the public, and that's throughout our entire network. So far, so good, I would say. In terms of installation, I believe it was really quick and effective. We tend to use machine certification and single sign-on to restrict our access at the moment, and that's working well. The product's definitely increased our visibility of wired and wireless provision in our environment. As you can see on the video, we've got floor plans showing location of all our access points and their usage, and hotspots provide a good level of technical data and reporting to the team to help maintain the secure service our customers expect. Obviously, moving forward with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have questions like I'm sure you have on the use of your physical buildings and infrastructure. but I believe the fact that we've got Aruba and Switchshop as our core partners in our delivery of our infrastructure, we'll be moving forward with future plans if and when our sort of strategic leadership team decide that the building usage does not need to be maintained, because home working is a factor of life for everyone these days. So I thought I'd give you an example of the wraps. The wraps that we procured were going to be used for our outreach offices, or what we class as pop-up offices, as long as we've got a simple ADSL line into an office. And the reason for that was just to simplify the delivery of our network services to our geographically spread sites around our area and beyond our geographical curtilage of our council. The idea was to provide swift service enablement cheaply and efficiently, without having to put costly lease lines into some of our areas, with the way our technology works. And I will say the service does appear quicker over the wrap connectivity than some other traditional sort of VPN circuitry. Obviously, the impact for us operationally has been an increase in our business continuity areas. We're not just using our offices, as I've already mentioned. We're using it in people's homes. However, one of the limitations of some of our solutions, we're a thick client. A lot of our applications are web-based, so we still need that connectivity to our host, which obviously is in our main offices. However, we have one solution, which is our lifeline operation. So this supports vulnerable people, both telephony and data. And our current VPN solution didn't work that well. So we decided to trial the wraps to give the user experience the same as they are when they're in the office. And we've managed to make that work, and that's been successful in providing extra capacity to that service, because as you can imagine, with the impact of COVID is on the vulnerable people, and that's who we're having to support primarily in these times. So by using the wraps, we've been able to mitigate some of the challenges we have with traditional VPN and rules and ports swapping on firewalls to the data, and we've also enabled printing into some of these remote areas as well. So I think the wraps for me has been a real big benefit. And I actually see the increase in use availability of the wraps for further opportunities for the organisation, but we'll see how that goes moving forward. So in terms of low cost, we've obviously done tenders over many years for different things, and networking was quite a core procurement at the time. This has gone back about 3 or 4 years now, or probably 4 or 5 years. And HPE and as it before was Aruba were probably the cheapest solution on the market to meet our enterprise needs, and that's compared to some of the other major manufacturers out there as well. So I think we've been successful in choosing HPE as it was, and obviously Aruba moving forward, and actually upgrading from existing network management and network infrastructure has enabled us to extend our capabilities without having to dispose of our previous investment. So as a heads up, we're running Wi-Fi 6 APs, and that's obviously future-proofing our design and sort of the wrap utilization, and that's where we are. So thank you for your time, and I believe I'll pass you back to Michael now before we get into the FAQs.
No, thank you, Craig. It's Patricia here. You're handing back to me.
I was close. Right. There's one or two.
That's absolutely fine. Well done, and thank you so much for your insights. And we have a couple of questions, and we are nearly at the end time of 3 o'clock. I'd like to just invite Dave Crowther, who's a senior engineer at Switchshop, to answer the one question that I'm going to put to you, Dave. And the other questions, I'm sure the participants won't have any issue if we come back to them directly. So Dave, for you, just to wrap up our session this afternoon, your question, is there a list of network devices that are supported by Aruba ClearPass?
Well, it's probably quite important to say that ClearPass itself is a kind of standards-based interface. So it's primarily offering a radius service, which is a standards-based, protocol-based service, really. So it is actually compatible with anything that's a standard network. There are some components, and I mentioned earlier, there's sort of ideas about profiling devices and onboarding aspects And for those, at least, yeah, there are a list of kind of supported platforms, but they're encompassing and iOS and Android and pretty much everything. But the core piece of the product, this authentication and identity piece, is standards based, and therefore it basically works with anything that supports the Radius protocol.
Great, thank you so much for that, Dave. I think to be respectful for people's times, it's now 15:01, so we will end the session this afternoon. Thank you to everybody for participating, to our panel, our experts, and to Sedgemoor District Council, and to you all. Thank you very much, and have a very good afternoon.